You know, when I was 14, I traveled across country with my 98-year-old grandfather and my aunt. My grandfather turned to me out of nowhere at one point and said, "It's hell to get old, boy." And it may or may not be hell to get old, but it's tough to retire in this country when you get old. And here to shed some light on it, on that very subject for us, is economist Monique Morrissey. Monique works with the Economic Policy Institute here in Washington, D.C., and her areas of focus include Social Security, pensions and benefits, household savings, pretty much all the things you might expect reflect on the issues of retirement and aging economically in the society. And she has just released a new report entitled The State of American Retirement. She joins us now. Monique, thanks for coming on the program.
Thanks for having me, Richard.
So you have some striking findings in this report, some of which were known before, but some of which not known by me. But uh, I would say their assembly into the 32, I think it's 32 charts you put together here, tells a powerful story. What does it tell you?
Well, I think three main points stand out. The first is what the main focus of the chart book is. It's that we're moving towards a system that magnifies inequality. We're sort of used to inequality in America now. I mean, we shouldn't accept it, but we are used to it. But we used to have a retirement system, at least, that tended to reduce inequality. Social Security does reduce inequality and still does, has always done so. But we're now increasingly moving towards a system, a 401k system that magnifies inequality and by a lot. That's a big problem. The second part, lesson of the chart book, is that this inequality hasn't been random. Some groups have been fared worse than others. And the third, which actually was a surprise to me too, is that even 25 years, a quarter century after 401ks displaced defined benefit pensions, traditional pensions, as the primary employer-based retirement plan, we're still getting 6 times as much in pension benefits. Retirees are getting 6 times as much in pension benefits as they are getting out of these 401k plans, which is very surprising that it's that lopsided, given how long it's been since 401k plans have been the law of the land, at least in the private sector.
So basically, we've got it seems to me as I look back over the broad history of retirement or aging in this country, before Social Security, you had a situation where an enormous number of older Americans lived in poverty. Then you had Social Security kind of helping to redress that balance. You had the post-war era, and again, you know these numbers better than I, but this is my impression. Post-war era, where we had a much stronger retirement system, Social Security plus pensions from corporations for people lucky enough to make it into the middle class. And granted, that wasn't every segment of our society, but if people worked all of their adult lives, they in certain demographics anyway, they tended to have pretty good retirement security. Maybe they paid off a home by that time and so on. So they had the pensions and other pieces of it. Then Medicare came in to relieve the pressure of medical expenses and so on. But then that began to erode as employers switched from pension plans to things like 401ks. And now it seems as if they used to talk about a three-legged stool of retirement: savings, pension, and Social Security. Now it seems between what's happened to savings in the middle class and middle class wages and what's happened to pensions, like two of those legs have been sawed off, and people are really struggling. And is that, first of all, a fair summary?
That's an absolutely accurate summary. And yes, the three-legged stool, which was always a bit of an exaggeration, is certainly not true now. And one way to picture it is whether it's a three-legged stool with two legs sawed off, or just we've always had just a bar stool, and one-legged stool. That's certainly the case. And yes, that a couple of things happened. We expanded Social Security, and as you noted, in doing so, we drastically reduced poverty in old age. So it's the single most effective anti-poverty program that the United States has ever had. And for many years, every year we would include more people or expand benefits, raise contributions. And that ended in 1983 when we were facing a shortfall and we decided to start trimming back benefits. And we did it by raising the retirement age, which is really no different than an across the board benefit cut. And at the time, I mean, in hindsight, it was a mistake. At the time, there were some arguments for it. I mean, it was maybe, we'd been increasing Social Security. Maybe it was time that we stopped this process. But the problem with the timing is that right as we were doing that, we were all of a sudden 401ks were just starting to appear on the scene, and over the next 25 years they supplanted traditional pensions. So we were shrinking Social Security at the same time that we were displacing secure pensions with 401ks. And so we had two bad things happening at the same time. And so I think the most important thing we need to do is fix the first part of that, which is reverse those cuts to Social Security. But we also need to just think about, the what to do about 401k, the employer-based side of things. So, I mean, I think the number one priority is expand Social Security, but we also need to think about making 401k like plans more like traditional pensions, more secure, better, safer, more
Yeah,
cost effective.
it's striking to me that corporations are doing very well in terms of profitability and are also paying less in aggregate taxes than they were, say, 40 or 50 years ago. Again, I didn't look at the numbers again before this interview, but and yet are, I think, paying less in on the retirement side. In fact, I will tell you quickly, Monique Morrissey of Economic Policy Institute, that when I was a benefits analyst, I think it was in the late 80s, when I was young, one of the top CEOs on Wall Street, we were talking about these issues, and I finally said, "Sir, what is it you want to do?" And he said, "I want to give the employees less and make them think it's more." And that to me is the story of the 401k.
That
Uh,
is.
so, some of the things you found in your state of the of retirement report, nearly half of all working age families have no retirement savings. If you're in the top fifth on income, 9 out of 10 families have something saved, but fewer than 1 in 10 in the bottom fifth. Again, you talked about inequality going in, racial inequality. Only 41% of black families and 26% of Hispanic families have retirement account savings, compared with 65% of white non-Hispanic families. So it seems to me that this is really the story of not just an eroding security system for retirement, financial security net for retirement, but it's also the story, as you said, of growing inequality and growing inequality along racial and other social lines, right?
Yes, absolutely. And I think it's important to remind people that it wasn't always this way. In fact, if you look at participation in employer retirement plans, at the dawn of the 401k era, it was actually fairly equal between blacks and whites. Now, Hispanics have always lagged behind, and that's just gotten worse. But at least among blacks and whites, among college educated versus high school educated, with pensions, the participation was relatively equal. Then you move, as the 401ks took over, we see this yawning gap emerge. And so it's not a situation of it's always been bad and it's just getting worse. It's a situation of it was not that bad and it's getting a lot worse. And I think the problem is that we've tended to blame the victim rather than looking at a system that's just not working for most Americans.
Well, and when we talk about blaming the victim, Monique Morrissey of Economic Policy Institute, I guess one of the things that strikes me is that we tend to hear a lot of what to me sounds like moralistic or preachy talk about how Americans are careless and don't save enough for retirement. But it seems to me that it's very, very hard to get by nowadays for a lot of families, and that saving may be a luxury that they're not able to afford once I mean, it may be a necessity, but it's also something they can't afford once they get done trying to pay their bills, and that any economic catastrophe makes it completely impossible.
Yes, no, that's right. In addition to the fact that we were cutting Social Security at the same time that we were displacing secure pensions, the other factor that you mentioned is very important, which is that the same era, those decades were also one of growing inequality, stagnating or even declining wages for much of many Americans. So people were already it was already an uphill battle for many Americans, and then they're asked to pay more into their into retirement by themselves, shoulder all the risk, handle all the responsibility. It's overwhelming. Also, these plans are very inefficient. They're costly. They're risky. They're really not a good deal for most Americans, especially lower income Americans, who may not get much, if anything, in terms of a tax break or an employer contribution. So really, I think we've spent a lot of time wringing our hands about people not saving enough, and yet no other, industrialized country puts so much of a burden on workers themselves to do so much, and especially at a time when other things are not going right for them.
Right. And I think that's one of the key points people need to remember about retirement when they're interpreting data like the charts that you provide in this important report. So, if we were to list a short list of 5 or 6 solutions. I mean, we mentioned expanding Social Security. We mentioned trying to make corporate pensions look a little bit more like they used to. What are a couple other solutions we might want to look at?
Well, first of all, I should acknowledge that there is one good reason why we have moved from away from traditional pensions, and that's because employers are not really in a position, most of them, to provide single employer pensions, to be around 50, 60 years down the road, and take on these kinds of pension liabilities. So that's single employers. Now, that's not a reason that we shouldn't do multi-employer plans, and it's certainly not a reason why we shouldn't have public sector pensions for people who are employed in the public sector. So, I mean, as I mentioned, I can't stress enough that the number one, by far most important thing is expanding Social Security and doing it across the board, not just for selected groups. Secondly, is sort of a negative bit of advice, but it's really important, is that, again, I mentioned that, 401ks have been the dominant plan for a quarter century, and yet pension benefits are still 6 times as important as 401k or IRA
Hmm.
distributions for seniors. And yet, what's going on right now around the country, and if you're not a teacher or a firefighter or policeman, you may not be aware of this, but public pensions are under attack. So there's this tendency to try to cut the pensions that exist. Also, a lot of multi-employer pensions, those are they're
Right.
multi-employer but union-sponsored pension funds are in trouble. We need to shore those up. So the pensions that exist, we need to protect them because they're still vastly more important than 401ks. Then you get into the thorny issue of, okay, if we can't move back the clock to a place where employers, especially small employers, can ever offer a pension, how do we make 401ks or IRAs, a retirement plan that's an individual retirement plan, act more like a pension? And a lot of states are experimenting with this. I think one of the states that's most advanced, one of the first ones to look into this, is California. In California, they have something called the California Secure Choice Plan, and they are looking to cover workers who are don't currently have anything offered by their employer. So typically lower income, small business employees, that kind of thing. And one thing about this plan is that it's a lot better than I thought it would be. They just recently issued a report, and they're really being innovative. They're experimenting. They're not just trying to keep costs down, but they're also addressing the problem of risk. So I think California is really a model for other states. They're looking at the possibility of actually trying to smooth the risk so that if people retire right in the wake of, let's say, the Great Recession, like the baby boomers were approaching retirement right at the wrong time, they wouldn't see losses. And they would do this with a reserve fund, not by just investing very conservatively. And so it's very innovative. It's smart. I think people should look into it. That said, I think that even though the California plan is very good and people are talking about putting significant amounts of money into it, there's no room for employer contributions. There are other problems with it compared to expanding Social Security. So I think that really needs to be the number one priority.
Well, okay, I think that's a great summary. I thank you also for your report at EPI.org, the State of American Retirement. We've been speaking with economist Monique Morrissey. And Monique, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you very much, RJ.